middle of the 14th century, Europe was a world of stone castles, wooden villages, and crowded cities. People lived close to the land, close to their animals, and close to each other. Then, almost without warning, death arrived on ships. It began in the east. In the 1330s, a mysterious disease swept through parts of Central Asia. Traders and soldiers carried it along the Silk Road. By 1346, it had reached the Crimean port of Kaffa. Genoese merchants, trapped inside the city by a Mongol siege, watched in horror as the attackers began to sicken and die. According to one account, the Mongols loaded their catapults with the bodies of the dead and hurled them over the walls.
Mongols loaded their catapults with the people and hurled them over the walls.
Whether that story is exact or not, the disease found its way onto the merchant ships that fled back to Italy. In October 1347, those ships docked in Sicily. Within days, the same symptoms appeared on shore: fever, vomiting, painful swellings in the armpits and groin that turned black, and death that often came within 3 days. The plague had arrived in Europe. People called it the Great Mortality. Later generations would name it the Black Death. In just 5 years, it would kill between 1/3 and 1/2 of everyone living in Europe. In some towns, the death rate was even higher. Entire villages disappeared. Cities that once rang with the noise of markets fell silent. The disease traveled with terrifying speed. It moved along trade routes, river valleys, and crowded streets. It did not care if you were rich or poor, priest or peasant, young or old. Kings lost children. Monasteries lost almost all their monks. In Florence, the writer Giovanni Boccaccio watched friends and neighbors die in such numbers that there were not enough living people left to bury the dead. Doctors tried everything they knew. They bled patients, they burned aromatic herbs, they recommended sitting between 2 large fires. Nothing worked. The true cause, a bacterium later named Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas that lived on rats, would not be understood for more than 500 years. As the bodies piled up, society began to crack. Priests who should have given last rites often refused to enter the houses of the dying. Flagellants walked from town to town, whipping themselves in public to beg God for mercy. In some places, terrified people blamed minority groups and attacked them. Order itself seemed to be dying along with the population. And then, slowly, the worst waves passed. By the early 1350s, the first great pandemic had burned itself out in most of Western Europe. Though smaller outbreaks would return for centuries, what remained was a continent that looked and felt completely different. Before the plague, Europe had been a land of too many people and too little land. Labor was cheap. Landowners held almost all the power. After the Black Death, everything reversed. Suddenly, there were not enough workers to harvest the fields or tend the animals. Survivors could demand higher wages. Many simply left the estates where their families had lived for generations and sought better terms elsewhere. The old feudal bonds began to loosen. In England, the government tried to freeze wages with the Statute of Laborers in 1351. It failed. Workers continued to demand more. Peasant revolts broke out, the Jacquerie in France, the Peasants' Revolt in England in 1381. The old social order was under pressure as never before. The church was shaken as well. So many priests had died that the quality of new clergy often fell. Ordinary people began to question why God had allowed such suffering, and why the church had been powerless to stop it. New religious movements appeared. In time, the crisis of faith would help open the door to the Reformation. Art and culture changed too. The smiling, graceful figures of earlier medieval art gave way to images of death. The Danse Macabre, the Dance of Death, appeared on church walls, skeletons leading kings, bishops, and peasants in a brame procession. Memento Mori, the reminder that death comes for everyone, became a central theme. Yet out of the catastrophe also came unexpected gains. With fewer mouths to feed, survivors often ate better. Real wages rose for ordinary people in many places. Land that had been overworked was left fallow and recovered. Some historians argue that the higher living standards and greater social mobility after the plague helped create conditions that later favored innovation and the rise of a more dynamic economy. The Black Death did not stay in Europe. It struck the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia with similar force. In every region it touched, it left deep scars and unexpected openings. Hundreds of years later, we still live with its consequences. The modern world of higher wages, greater mobility, and a less rigid social hierarchy owes something to the terrible years of the mid-14th century. Today we understand the bacterium, the fleas, and the rats. We have antibiotics and public health systems that make a repeat of the Black Death almost impossible in most of the world. Yet the story remains a warning. A single pathogen traveling along the same trade routes that once connected civilizations can rewrite the rules of human society in a handful of years. The Black Death was not just a medical disaster. It was a turning point in history, a moment when death itself became the most powerful agent of change. A new world began to take shape. That is the true legacy of the plague that once threatened to end European civilization. It forced the survivors to build something different, and in many ways, we are still living in the world the Black Death made.
If you liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe.